It's our projections episode. Tonight, we'll talk to Fangraph's own Dan Szymborski about what goes into projections, including his own Szymborski projection system called Zips. Plus, we'll do our deep dives of ATC undervalued corner infielders. Beat the Shift is next. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast, presented by Fangraphs. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Northeast is getting about to be hit by a strong nor'easter. It might get about 12 to 16 inches here out on Long Island. Are you going to get anything where you are, Ruvain?
I'm supposed to get a little bit, but I think the people who were hit the most by this was Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens not getting into the Hall of Fame.
Oh, boy. Oh, that's another story.
They were hit by a snowstorm, and they got knocked out.
Yeah, but congratulations to David Ortiz, who made it. One of the few pure DHs elected into the Hall of Fame. I was a big proponent of Edgar Martinez getting into the Hall, and I thought that I think he's a lot better than David Ortiz. So, hey, one got in, and so did the other. So there you go.
Yep.
All right. Well, today we've got a great show. It's our projections episode and corner infield episode here. And, well, we're bringing on a projections guru. He writes for Fangraphs, and he is the creator of the Zips projection system. A warm Beat the Shift welcome to Dan Szymborski. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
Doing lovely today.
Doing great.
And where are you located, by the way?
I am from Baltimore, but I live in Ohio, so I am safe from the cyclone bomb.
There you go. The cyclone bomb. That's a great name for it. There you go. But
that's what they called it. You have to categorize winter storms now like they're weaponry.
Yeah, that is fun. It's not only good, but it's fun. That's the important part of weather forecasting system. Hey, before we start, I got to ask, Zips, I hope you do know how to spell your last name, because the Szymborski projection system starts with a Z, but your name starts with an S. What's going on there, Dan?
Well, I thought that Sips sounded like a juice box. That sounds like the explanation of a crazy person, but I assure you it's accurate. It's like sips, like what are we sipping? Z is naturally a cooler letter, and it's the letter that I pronounce in my last name. So I liked Zips better, even if it sounds like a shoe.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I love it. Yeah, before we talk about your specific projection system, maybe could you tell the audience here what in general goes into creating a projection system?
Well, there's a lot of research. That's one of the. It's a lot more work than genius at this point. But essentially, on a fundamental level, projection systems are fairly simple. You're basically trying to use the data to pinpoint where a player is, and then you have some kind of method for detecting where they're going. It's the same as projecting a winter storm in a way. You need to know where all the low-pressure systems are and where they're going, and you can do that in simple ways like Marcel the Monkey does, or you can do it in needlessly complex ways like I tend to do.
Yeah. You definitely hit the nail on the head there. I do insurance modeling. I model, believe it or not, hurricanes and earthquakes because it's insurance. The impact is on what are we going to lose insurance-wise, right? How are the insured homes affected? And to do that, you have your contracts, and you first have to get a weather model and flow that through and simulate if there's a certain amount of damage to your home, what the cost is to the people, and then what the cost is on what's insured to the company. So I guess it's similar. All these projection models are similar in that regard.
Yeah, I was a math major, so in another alternate universe, if the multiverse theory is correct, I'm sure there are a lot of Dan Szymborskis out there who are actuaries and didn't accidentally fall into a baseball career because that was kind of a weird series of events.
There you go. There you go.
I got a question though. How does Zips set itself apart from the rest of the other projection systems that are out there?
Well, that's always kind of a tricky question because I know exactly how Zips works, but I don't know every little aspect of Steamer or Pagoda or the Bat. So it's always hard to tell exactly what I'm doing differently than them. So it might not even be accurate. I could have some misconceptions. I think it's what makes it different is possibly the way I find cohorts of similar players. Baseball Prospectus goes more the machine learning route. I do kind of more normal cluster analysis techniques. I like things like Mahalanobis distance. I like models that I can dissect the variables because I don't just want the result. I want to see how the result comes about. And with machine learning, sometimes it's a little tricky. I'm not just trying to project players. I also want the knowledge that's generated from projecting the players. That's just the approach I take. But it could be that Steamer is now doing exactly what I do. But I don't really know that. You have to ask Jared.
Yeah, I mean, every projection system is going to have different elements. All projection systems do three basic things, right? They regress to the mean. They have some kind of aging curves, and they take history and they weight it with more credit given to the more current years. But in terms of, do they look at some StatCast data? Do they use XStats to fill in some stats instead? That kind of stuff is what differentiates people. I know Derek Hardy actually incorporates weather. Like he incorporates the fact that in Colorado you could have you could have a snow out in April, and the ball travels differently in the cold than in the heat. So he's projecting different things for Colorado and Los Angeles and New York. He even takes into account the umpires. If Angel Hernandez is umping, the strike is going to be a little bit wider, the strike zone that is. So every projection system does something a little bit different. What do you have in yours that is just that you might think is completely bonkers compared to the others? I shouldn't say bonkers, completely revolutionary maybe.
I don't know. Revolutions is a difficult thing. Only a few people are revolutionary. I do use kind of an XStats model, but it's Z-stats because I like to construct everything I use myself. Maybe that's a little over paranoid, but I'm a very careful, very rigorous about making sure new things work so that I don't break old things. So I do use StatCast data, but I implement Z-stats differently. For instance, you look at their batting average and balls in play model. They don't have the direction of like a ground ball when evaluating what should be a hit and what shouldn't be. I do, and these are ways that the things differ. A lot of these peripheral Z-stats, X-stats are kind of in a way some of regression instead of using just a generalized regression model. And the idea is just kind of to be a little more accurate with that. I also think that I probably project longer and more long-term than most projection systems are, except Pagoda. You tend to see projection systems focus on the next year. I haven't really had a huge focus on the next year for some time, simply because we're pretty good at this point at projecting the next year. And I do things that try to translate things that aren't inherently statistical into numbers. For example, my long-term model for playing time includes things like a player's contract, the number of years he's been with a team, in an effort to just kind of get a more realistic decline curve as we go forth in a player's career, because that's what every player has in common. Decline is coming, age is coming, because time always wins. I probably have a larger database of comparable players simply because I have minor league translations now going back into the early 50s. So I think those are probably the things that most set it apart.
So if a player is going into, let's say, the last year of their contract, or becoming a free agent the following year, does that change the statistics a little bit? Does it change the numbers a little?
It changes the playing time. It's a bigger fact when you're talking long term. For example, Zips was aware of Albert Pujols' contract, so that from its purely internal playing time projection, that it made him lose playing time more slowly. The projections always would insist otherwise, that Albert Pujols would lose his job at about age 37 because he hasn't really been a good player in a long time. But we also know the reality is that the Angels were not going to do that. So part of the projection was essentially modeling the behavior of a major league team. And when that's feasible, I try to do that.
Right. Yeah. Now, you mentioned that. No, I know also that Zips project out multi-years, right? Most of the projections that we look at, if we're playing fantasy baseball, is for the next year. I guess people who do dynasty leagues, they would want to actually see projections for a couple of years. But yeah, you mentioned that you look at contracts and you do stuff. Things change very rapidly in a player. All of a sudden, he has a new swing. All of a sudden, he's taking more pitches. Like, how do you account for all this stuff when projecting in the future for distant years?
Well, I guess the answer I usually give to that question is more inaccurately. When you go back to talking about projecting like a hurricane or a winter storm, you see kind of that cone of ignorance go farther and farther apart. And that's kind of what you get with the career projections. Zips generates curves on the fly derived from the large cohort of hopefully roughly similar players. So the error bars get larger and larger, but there is a middle ground. You do have kind of essentially your ensemble model in a way. And you just hope that the tides of change don't flood over you, because it does happen, and on a season-to-season basis, you can see some pretty wild swings. But projecting a player's next 5 years is easier in a lot of ways than projecting their next year. For instance, ESPN asked me for some career projected stats for Barry Bonds and Clemens as of the late 90s. And they wanted for the information of the readers, they wanted error rates on the projections. And the data I was showing them was essentially that the 1 year projections for a player are less accurate than projecting 5 years for a player,
right,
simply because on a fundamental level, we're projecting a small sample size, and you don't actually really get to know for a fact whether your projection was accurate or not. It's kind of a Kafka-esque idea, but that's kind of what it is.
It's definitely easier to get the long-term numbers right, because anything can happen. It's 162 games, right? It is a limited sample size, and a player's true talent. We know that home run rates, let's say, don't stabilize till very late in the season. It might even take 2 seasons for a home run rate to stabilize. So you're right in that regard.
And what about rookie players? Because rookie players are so hard to be able to project, especially let's say 2 players coming up, Adley Rutschman and Bobby Witt. They're both projected to be in the majors this year. Those 2 players. Or what about foreign players coming from Japan? How do those fit in?
Well, I do minor league translations of my own. I was actually studying minor league to major league data long before I even got into the projection game. That was kind of one of my first statistical passions. In the early-ish 90s, I actually hand copied all the stats on AOL data, because they actually had an extensive minor league database that you couldn't download anywhere because there was nowhere to download. I think people now don't fully realize what a bleak, empty landscape it was for baseball data 20 years ago. You didn't have any spreadsheet or database until Sean Layman's baseball database. Baseball Reference in those days only updated once a year after the season, which seems absolutely absurd in 2022 to talk about that. But that was the case. Baseball Reference was just a site, and then there was one day in late October where it updated for the year. So there's a lot more we can do now, and I like to think that I've learned a lot about minor league projecting, but the error bars are still going to be very large.
And now, what about there's other variables that go along with trying to predict baseball players, such as where they're going to play. Like the Toronto Blue Jays, you didn't know what stadium they're going to play in. Are we using a different ball? Are the pitchers going to use a sticky substance? The short seasons. How do all these get packed into the projections?
Well, in a lot of cases they don't. That it's part of just the unknowable. I don't know what next year's ball is going to be. I don't know what next year's park factors are going to be. I use recent history as a guide, but when there's a change, you don't really know. And one of the things is I like to avoid guesswork, because one of the basic, philosophical concepts of Zips is it has as little input as possible from me. anytime there's a way that I think that I could systematically improve it with my opinion, I try to find the underlying data for that opinion and implement it. For instance, Zips is aware of when a pitcher has Tommy John surgery. I prefer just to have as little direct input into a projection as possible. Even if I thought I could make a projection better, I might mention it in an article I write, but it would never affect the projection in that way. It goes back to like the Orioles moving out the fence in left field this year. I have a sense that it's going to obviously affect home run totals. You're probably going to see fewer home runs and more doubles and triples in all likelihood. But I don't really like guesswork unless I'm absolutely forced to, like in the COVID shortened season where I had to guess what the weights were going to be for 2021. So some things I think are lost in the aether, and people who are using projections need to take that into account. I don't claim to take all the work away from people when using and understanding projections.
Well, so actually, specifically for this year, did you project at all regarding the lockout? Do you think that's going to affect the projections at all?
From a projection standpoint, no. I think that depending on the time frame and what spring training looks like, it could have an effect on the game, but it's also unknowable in some ways. And it's just going to be a source of error that is really hard to control for. I don't like guessing about a factor instead of ignoring it or just admitting that it's something that this projection system or maybe any projection system is poorly equipped to deal with.
Right. I guess it's important to know that, take a guy like Ryan Mountcastle who might have relied on that short fence and close fence to hit some homers. If somebody is going to be using your projection system for this coming year, they might have to take his home run total with a grain of salt if you haven't incorporated that yet, I guess, right?
Yeah, because it's easier to tell a person that I don't know what the new effect is than to tell a person there's some change in there that I believe, and you're going to have to figure out what part of the projection is the projection and what part of it is what I believe. And right. I think that's also one of the reasons you don't see me with the official Zips projections be hands-on with like playing time.
Well, that was my next question, which you might have guessed. Yeah, well, what you're referring to is I've been talking with Dan for a couple years now, and my major quibble with Zips is literally the playing time. That and I guess you can tell me if I'm wrong, but one thing that Zips does not do is it does not actually try to predict the playing time in the sense of this guy will only have 100 at bats. He's coming up in the minors; he'll only have 400 at bats. You'll actually just give what a guy of that caliber should have in a full season, assuming he's up, assuming he gets that full role, and there you go in itself. But of course, most other projection systems, and I know I do this quite a bit as a fantasy baseball player, I try to allocate the playing time and try to make sure that I only have a certain player projected for a certain amount, because that counts towards the aggregate value in fantasy of the guy. And my question to you is, A, am I right in describing what you do? And B, I don't know. I just doesn't jive with me. I think that the guess is important as to the playing time. No.
Well, it depends exactly what questions you're trying to answer. One of the things is Zips wasn't designed as a fantasy focused projection system. I didn't really have fantasy in mind when developing it. I'm not sure what I had in mind, but beyond my own personal interest, I tend to find a computer a better. I wanted the computer to do what the computer does well, which is projecting how good a player is, not how a team will lose them. And you can look at the playing time as a projection, but it's kind of a projection across multi-levels. For instance, the projection system is not a pitcher who's injured every year. The projection system isn't going to say he's really good, he's going to throw 200 innings. It might say 120 innings. And for a minor leaguer, you might see a 400 at-bat projection, but that's probably the at-bats spread out over multiple professional levels, not the major leagues necessarily. There are other ways to do this, and I tend to go towards the way that has the least human intervention, because I want zips to be something that people can run if I'm dead. And anything that I do would die with me, and when I shuffle off the mortal coil at some point in the next 0 to 50 years. So I have gone with the approach of using past playing time. There are naturally going to be adjustments for the injuries that Zips is aware of, age, long-term Zips, as I mentioned, does have a model for reducing playing time. But things that come down to specific team-related decisions, I don't consider that part of Zips. When I project like a season, then I do playing time because it's very important. But just for knowing how good a player is, I don't tend to think the actual playing time matters that much. There is an argument to just, for those kinds of projections, do everyone to, 600 plate appearances, catchers to 450, starters to 180, relievers to 60. But that just also looks weird to me. So I just go with history, essentially.
Right. And by the way, I asked this question out of respect, for what you do.
You can ask me any question out of disrespect. I'm a big boy, and if I can't defend my work, then it's not that valuable.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, You should hear me. I mean, I do radio in Denver from time to time, and I'm pretty hard on the Rockies, if you've noticed on Twitter.
Yeah.
You have to be prepared for a hostile audience.
Yeah, you are definitely a man who is of his convictions and tells people. I'll tell you that. That is true.
To my suffering once in a while, but that's life.
There you go. Yeah. And by the way, you're not the only projection system that doesn't really account for that. I mean, Derek Carty's The Bat, which is also a great projection system, they don't do anything. I mean, he will say, I don't know how to do playing time. It's not based on the computer, just like you said. This year, Derek Carty actually made the decision to switch the playing time to actually use my projection, my playing time. So if you actually go on Fangraphs and you say, why does the Bat project for the same number of bats as ATC? Well, it's not a coincidence. He's actually taking my playing time, but he does the rates, and so on and so forth. But people should know that I would say the fantasy redraft relevant version of Zips is going to be on the site called Zips DC, which is the Fangraphs depth charts playing time, and the Zips numbers run through them. And people should also know that on the site we have the depth charts projections, and that is our own Jason Martinez doing the playing time, and a combination of Steamer and Zips for the rates, if I have that correct.
Yeah, that is correct. It's not completely up yet because I just submitted the projections to Dave, so it should be up in a few days. But definitely the one time I regret not having playing time projections is when there's a fantasy-based evaluation of the projection systems. Like last year, I was like, oh, God, I'm going to get killed from the playing time.
Yeah, I mean, I write that yearly article, and it's not my article. I should say what I'm talking about. I write a projections article where I compare projections, but not from accuracy, from effectiveness. Meaning, if you, what would happen if you would have used the Zips projection system? Who would you have drafted, and how did those players fare? Did they make money on the average? Did they make more money than using ATC or Steamer or whatever? And Zips always comes out lousy, but it's not because of the rates. It's
the playing time.
Yeah,
the playing time totally. And people sometimes, like in chats, they'll be like, "Did you see what Ariel did?" And like, yeah, he's evaluating a specific thing. It's fine. He's not out to get me.
Right.
Chill out.
And my first note, by the way, I always have my notes, and I see my first note is always the Zips does not evaluate playing time. That's what's going to be. But this time around when we did Zips DC, you were right in the thick of things in terms of effectiveness. So there you go.
Which is good, because if I was still in trouble, that'd be like, I gotta chase something up. Something's been going wrong since the COVID year.
Right. And I can tell you, because I do the ATC projections, there is considerable amount of weight that I use on the Zips projections in some of my rates. I know there's at least 2 of them that are important that you have the highest weight. So I do know that Zip does work. So I should.
But it is always funny when when you see the playing time. That's like the one time I regret it, because when people are evaluating projection systems, it's much more fun to look smart.
This is true. Before I go into our corner infield discussion, is there anything new that your system has done this year? Have you changed?
No, it's just kind of additional modeling. I spent so much time last year trying to figure out how to deal with the shortened season that I haven't really felt comfortable pushing too many new things into the latest Zips model, because there's always a Zips model that I'm using in the upcoming year, and there are also ones I plan in future years that I'm not fully confident in, because there's only so much you can do with cross-validation. There's no substitute for having new seasons of data that Zips has never seen to evaluate. So there isn't too much new this year. I've continued to refine my minor league defensive measure. I track game days, ball location data for defensive plays in the minors, and I kind of have a little UZR-esque defensive system for minor league players, because that's kind of a problem when you're projecting minor league players in the majors, because they don't really have good minor league data to work with. So I've spent a lot of work, and I'm doing some minor league translation work, but that's probably not going to be in Zips for another year or two. I'm also working on a model for saves, which also has no human input, but I'm actually trying to model how teams choose who they're going to use as a closer. And I'm actually going to do a little machine learning for that, which isn't what I normally do, but some of the variables are kind of tricky to work with issues like experience, history of being used as a closer, how much they're paid when they were signed. So I'm working on trying to model that. I don't want saves to be something that I have to suddenly start using my opinion for.
Right.
All my descriptions of Zips makes it sound like I really don't trust anything I think.
Do this year's projections also assume that there's a DH?
Zips, I kind of took the middle ground for that, in that I used a model for AL NL difference that was kind of a blend of the last few seasons. So there's that 60 game DH season in there. I just don't know what baseball is going to do, so I kind of took the wussy middle ground, so to speak, because it's hard to project when some of the basis of what you're going to projecting won't be known until like March maybe.
Right. For the record, I spoke with Jason Martinez and Cross and Cardi somewhere, and I think those guys all went to full NLDH just because it's the most likely outcome for what would happen. Of course, anything could happen, and you may find out, we're not using it, but everything else on Fangraphs is that. So I guess the message then is to people using Zips, just know that the ERAs for NL pitchers could be a little bit on the lowish side, if I have that correct.
One of the weaknesses of Zips is the creator of Zips, who is a math econ guy, not a programming guy. So it's hard for Zips. It's hard for me to instantly change one thing and then just whip out a whole new amount of Zips. Every Zips projection takes my computer, which is a pretty up-to-date computer. It's a modern rising computer. Every projection takes about 2 minutes to run, simply because of the things it's modeling. That's why the in-season model is a simpler one, so that Fangraphs can run that every night to update during the season. And that is, I guess, if we're going back to things that Zips does differently, I do believe I might have been one of the first to have a formal in-season projections attached to Zips. I believe I was. I could be wrong. That's happened a lot, but I do believe I was one of the first to push that as a useful thing.
Wow, that's pretty.
Because otherwise,
incredible.
projections expire on the first day of the season, and people aren't using them during the season.
Right. No, and definitely your work. If you're the originator and the forefront of that, then kudos to you, because that's actually very important for everyone to look at. I know that I look at rest of season projections in the middle of the year. Why not? Right? It's the most accurate thing you can think of.
Yeah, we live in a Bayesian world, so I can put that on my thing. I'm the originator, maybe, of in-season projections.
We'll give you a 75% credit, and there you go.
Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe. All right. Well, anyways, that was a great discussion of projections and zips, and thank you for that. What we tend to do here in the preseason on our podcast, Beat the Shift, is we evaluate some players along the way. Now, we do a lot of strategy on our show, but we do want to talk about players. We do not talk about every single player. What we do is we use the ATC projections, obviously, to pick out some people that potentially could be bargains against what the current drafting market pricing indicates. And we have a couple of players in the corner infield. They're mostly first basemen. As we've said on the show, third baseman not as fruitful in terms of bargains. You're okay paying par value up top, but there's a lot of first basemen with bargains. So what we do is we evaluate, hey, let's go deep dive and let's talk about these specific players, and if they still are a bargain and if they still are okay in our eyes after we hash out all the details, then we look as there a possibility that we can draft on our teams. So that's what we're going to do today, and you'll help us with the corner infielders today. Just to set the stage, also, if you hear me talk about a price for a player or a draft round, obviously everyone plays in a different league. You can play in a 12-team league, 15-team league. I'm going to announce 15-team league 5x5 pricing, NFBC figures, just as a convention. The NFBC has very good ADP data, so it's just a good way to compare everything. So I apologize if you're a 10-team guy. You just have to shrink the numbers a little bit.
I like larger leagues because it's more fun to fight in the trenches on the lesser players than everybody's got stars. I used to do a lot more of that kind of fantasy work when I was with ESPN because I did have access. They gave me access to their database of leagues. So I used to do a lot of preseason type things where I could estimate. I could actually project values knowing the how the actual teams were coming out in their drafts, so I was able to actually have kind of a pretty good replacement level and a pretty good way to simulate how adding players to a team, that players who are currently on the waiver wire, how it affect the average team standing. So I do have experience doing these kinds of things, although my focus hasn't been fantasy, obviously.
Right. No, perfect. So I think this will be a great discussion, but before we get into the players, it's time for the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
Well, we're going to be talking about the corner infielders right now, and the first corner infielder we're going to tackle is Paul Goldschmidt, so my trivia will be about Paul Goldschmidt. Last year, Goldschmidt hit 31 home runs. Great. That means an RBI for each one of those home runs. But how many of them were solo home runs of the 31? Because that can make a big difference when it comes to his fantasy value.
31. I am going
Ariel.
to say, I don't know.
Dan goes first.
Oh, I guess I went first because I interrupted first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Guest goes
Let's
first.
see. Cardinals had a pretty okay-ish offense. 99 is a little on the low side, and he had a lot of opportunities. So I'm going to say probably less than half had players on base unusually. I will say that he had 17 solo home runs and 14 with runners on base.
I'll go with 20 solo home runs, about a third.
22 out of 31 were solo home runs, which means that he was hitting them. There was just no one on base to get those RBIs for him. I mean, every year he's consistent. He bats around 280 since 2012 until every year from 2012 until now, except for 2019 when he batted 260. His homers from 2013 until now, 36, 19 a year who's injured, 33, 24, 36, 33, 34, 31. That is consistency. He's had over 95 RBIs, 5 of the last 6 full seasons. He also can steal you 5 to 10 bases. Last year, people were scared because he had an injury within his elbow. He said he was going to manage it. I think he managed it pretty well. And now with the possible DH coming in, Paul Goldschmidt looks like a very, very good buy this year.
Do you guys remember Chris Hoyles?
Backup catcher for the Orioles.
Catcher for the Orioles.
Wow.
He had the way they used him is they put him kind of at the bottom of the lineup, and he hit a lot of home runs with nobody on base. He had a season of 20 home runs with 40 RBI. And that season, he hit 17 solo home runs and 3 home runs with runners on base. That was 1992.
Wow.
And it wasn't that he was terrible with runners on base. It's just that he had kind of a low percentage with runners on base.
Which is just a weird thing.
Wow. Pretty cool that you remember that stat offhand. I'm very impressed.
Yeah, it was. Well, I'm from Baltimore, so everyone
Right.
remembers the tale of Chris Hoyles, because as a young stat nerd, watching people say he stunk because of his RBIs was a frustrating thing.
Or maybe he stunk because he couldn't turn around Ben McDonald.
Whoa, Ben McDonald had injury issues. Ben McDonald was pretty darn good.
Okay.
I'm a Ben McDonald stanner here.
Okay. Fine by me. But anyway, getting back to Goldschmidt, I think where he is right now, he's of excellent value, especially if people are still low on him because of his age, because he's getting up in age. I mean, he's so consistent. How do you not get someone who's this consistent?
Thoughts on him, Dan?
I mean, the age is a risk, but it's not a massive risk quite yet. He's still. You look at the team around him. He's still going to be probably in the top 10 in RBI, even if he has some decline. I know Zips has him declined to 25 home runs and 83 RBI. I actually think he'll do a little better than that. I think that the Cardinals' offense does have a little more upside into it than the projections might think. But I mean, as long as you're factoring in that risk and not taking him above, say, Freddie Freeman or something, which I don't think people will. Maybe they are. I don't know.
No.
Okay, I want to make sure that I haven't checked what necessarily the mock rankings for everyone yet. But if you look at first base, it's not really a glamour position the way it used to be. Once you get out of the top 10 first baseman, it's pretty just kind of bland. So there's a value to a guy who is almost certainly going to be a top 10 first baseman.
Yeah, so for fantasy, one of the big draws of Goldschmidt in the past was the fact that he steals. I mean, he had one year where he stole 32 bases, and he had a drought in terms of stolen bases. He went down to 7 to 3. He had only 1 in the 2020 season, and poof, 12 last year. So that's something to think about, and the question is he going to run or isn't he? Projection models have been sort of in the middle. Most projections have him at about 7 or 8 stolen bases going forward here. ATC has 8, but I mean, it's the same thing. But, even 8 stolen bases, even 5 stolen bases at the first base position does help. One thing about Paul Goldschmidt is his interprojectional standard deviation, meaning the difference between other projections, is really super small. The standard deviation I'm getting is within $1.50. Means that the ATC value of $24 of what you should pay in an auction for him, projections are really, really tight, and they don't go much more than $1 or $2 off of that. He's going in the market for about $22. He's going late 4th round, but he should be rostered early 4th round according to the value here. So the only issue to me with rostering a first baseman is, as you'll see today, there's a lot of other interesting bargains later on. And if you take a guy at a $2 bargain earlier, you'll miss a $7 bargain later. But other than that, he's super stable. His contact rate actually improved last year, the last couple of years. His contact rate is about 80%, which is phenomenal for a player. So he's got a very, very high floor. I think Paul Goldschmidt is an excellent buy for value. Just a question of, game theory and what do you have to give up in terms of what you could get later. Compare him with a guy who's going somewhat similar in the early 5th round, Pete Alonso, who is also a similar value, similarly in the market just a few picks later. Also super stable according to projections. He's a 40 home run guy, Pete Alonso. Now, his batting average last year, 262, I actually think it could have been better. Last year, he was hurt a little bit in the first month and a half. From June and on, he batted almost 270, and he slugged 540, as opposed to the first 2 months season where he slugged .453. I think Alonso actually, if you discount the injury, really back on track, and a 40 home run projection I think is a good average number to set. I think he's a nice bargain at this spot for, yes, 40 homers, pretty much the highest projected homer player in baseball, and in a Mets lineup which has improved. Thoughts on Pete Alonso, Dan?
Well, Zips does have him with 40 home runs for 2020.
All right.
Too. Which I guess is not that shocking a projection. I mean, he's never going to be a batting average guy, but if you look at the top 15 or so first basemen, how many of them really are major outliers, like in standard deviations for batting average? It's essentially, Vladimir Guerrero, Freddie Freeman, and then maybe Ty France. And that's pretty much it, I think. I mean, you look lower down the stacks, there's some guys who could have decent batting average and like less power, and that doesn't make them interesting. So the batting average doesn't worry me too much. I think it's a very ordinary batting average for a top first baseman at this point. So if you're not worried about the batting average and you're not worried about the stolen bases, because nobody's really going to steal 20 at first base, I think the maximum I have a starting first baseman at is like 8 or something like that. I'm trying to look real quick. Oh, well, I had Nick Prado with 8, but he's not going to start. I only have Goldschmidt with 7.
Okay.
Going back to Goldschmidt for a sec, I think one of the risks is what does a new manager bring? Well, Oliver Marmol, he was the first base coach for a couple years, then the bench coach. Will he use Goldschmidt as aggressively? So that's one of the questions. But back to Pete Alonso, I think the Mets will score more runs than they did in 2022 or 2021, and that will have the necessary the expected effect on the RBIs and the runs.
And speaking about the manager, the Mets have a new manager also, Buck Showalter, who's a little bit old school. And maybe if they keep Pete Alonso in the same spot in the lineup consistently, or keep a consistent lineup out there, that may also help him as well.
Yeah, and maybe I also hope that they don't get Ubaldo Jimenez, because that's my last memory of Buck as an Orioles manager.
Yeah, I do not think the Mets will be getting him. Any thoughts, Ruben, on Alonso, by the way, before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tale of two seasons from last year. In the beginning of first half of the last season, he batted .249. Second half, like you mentioned, he batted .275. But he hit 17 homers in the first half with a .249 average and hit 20 home runs in the second half. So that power is for real. So he had a very, I guess you'd say, a quiet 37 home runs. He was also more unlucky in the first part of the season, so that may just be the batting average right there. So with a better lineup, a lot of the players around him last year also underperformed, extremely underperformed. So just like I mentioned with Goldschmidt, if people in the lineup can get on in front of him, his RBI total will go up.
Dan, what are the odds that Alonso wins the home run derby this year?
I don't even know how to model that ahead of time before even knowing who's in, because you have to then kind of make a model for who's going to actually play in the.
True.
That's actually a fascinating thing to do in a preseason, which I might actually do at some point, especially if we don't have any baseball for news for a while.
Got to give me credit for asking the question, right?
Yeah. I mean, he obviously he's someone who is a good bet to be in that. Generally, the players that are younger and lower in service time are more excited about being in the home run derby. And I mean, he's not particularly young, but he's still, from a service time standpoint, one of the.
He'll be in the derby. He's in the derby for sure.
Yeah,
he likes the big stage, and it's going to be in LA this year, so that plays. He's going to put on a show
for sure. Well, the next guy we have is Josh Bell. Josh Bell has been on this ATC undervalued list every single year for the last 4 years. Josh Bell, he was a $15 player last year. His best year, 2019, of $24 player. Currently, ATC values him at $17, and he's only going to market for $12, almost in the 10th round, late 9th round. He has a relatively small standard deviation of projection results, meaning projections are, again, thinking he's the guy. I see his contact rate as being excellent. He had an 18% strikeout rate, which is phenomenal last year. You think of him as a big lumbering guy, but actually he makes quite a lot of contact, and his walk rate is amazing. He's 10, 11, even 12, he had 14% 1 year walk rate. So he gets on base. His StatCast numbers are up. He hits the ball. He barrels the ball. I think 2019 is in play where he was a $24 player, and I kind of think he got a little bit of bad luck last year. He had a BABIP of 276, a BABIP of 273 the previous year, so he's been a little bit unlucky. I think Josh Bell is somebody who can produce, and we're talking about a $5-6 bargain in the middle rounds. I prefer him in terms of value per dollar to Goldschmidt, and of course you can get him 6 rounds later than Goldschmidt. Your thoughts on Josh Bell, Dan?
Zips is actually a fan of Josh Bell coming into 2022, which is kind of a departure from in previous seasons. But Zips actually sees some batting average upside. You were talking about StatCast data.
Right.
The Z stats that Zips uses also the Z stats for Bell in 2021. I just opened it up, and Zips thought he should have been, based on his hit profile, a 279 hitter. So wow. Zips is projecting him to hit 273 this year, which I believe is higher than the other projection systems have pegged him at.
It is.
So I think the question for Bell is, by that point in the draft, you're starting to see what your team is looking like. And I think he's one of those situational value players where he has a lot more value if your team is looking like if you've taken some low batting average players at that point, then I think Bell has quite a bit of value. I don't think he's someone that you can draft blindly, not based on the construction of your team, but I think that for the right team, I think he's a big value. Zips essentially has him as the number 11 or so first baseman, but if you need that batting average, that could be the 7th or 8th best, which is pretty significant.
And in addition, he has a pretty good player batting in front of him, so he's going to have a lot of opportunities to knock said player in Juan Soto, I'm referring to. So I think the run production part of his game is still going to be high, and in fantasy, RBIs and runs account for 40% of your offensive totals, so which is important. Move in.
But he's got Juan Soto in front of him. Who's behind him? That's the problem. He has nobody behind him. It's going to be a really bad lineup, I think. So he may not get that many runs if he doesn't hit it out of the park, which is, he's not in. You're not getting him for his runs. But 87% of the balls in play from last year were either hit medium or hard. That's very, very good. And he's in a walk year. He's in a contract year. He is playing for a contract. And like I said, that lineup is not that good, which means there's nobody behind him. So he's going to get all the playing time. There's going to be no platoon here. So you know what? Draft him. You get 500 if he stays healthy. 550 at bats. You can almost count on it.
By the way, Dan, since you might have even looked at this, players in a walk year, have you noticed that they perform better, worse, or the same as anybody else?
I haven't found that walk year is a significant predictor in any way whatsoever.
Okay, that's a straight answer there.
Which is good in a way, because it's just one less strange variable you have to account for.
Yep. Yeah, the actuary in me knows that that's true, although for some reason we all feel that it's not.
Because it's psychological, because you remember the guys who had the big years. Right. Because they're going to get big contracts that have a lot of notice behind them. The guys who have poor years are going to have contracts that are paid less attention to because they might get less money otherwise.
That's right. So it's a psychological effect of why you think it's true, although it really isn't.
It's the same with the sophomore slump. The problem you have is that players who are great as rookies are more likely to have outperformed their expectations than underperformed their expectations, because the guys who underperform their expectations probably are still in the minors. So there's that belief that there's a sophomore slump, but once you actually look at it, there really isn't a sophomore slump. What you're looking at is just the regression towards the mean of guys who are overperforming.
Yeah, the only thing about that, though, is and maybe it's not sophomore, maybe it's mid-season, but at some point the league does adjust to the player.
Yeah,
they don't really have a book,
Yeah, that's something that every player has to learn, is because baseball's a game of constant adjustment. Everyone is seeing what you're doing and trying to fix what they do against you, so you're going to have to fix what you do against them.
Right. we got our first third baseman in our discussion tonight, Ryan McMahon of the Rockies. You hate on the Rockies, but we got a player that Fantasy ATC likes. $12 player going for $8. The last couple of years, he's hit 24 homers, pace of 24 in 2020, 23 homers. I kind of think he's around the 24-homer guy, and that's what almost every single projection system says. The batting average is not great. ATC projects him for 254. He's had some high strikeout rates in the past, so won't count on that. But run production is decent in Colorado. He should bat high up in the order. You have that conundrum of whether Trevor Story is there or not. It would mean that he would have more, if he's there, he would have more people to knock in. But, of course, he bats higher in the lineup if Story is not there. So, you got that dual action going on there. But, Ryan McMahon has a lot of value if you count all those counting stats. And he even contributes a couple of stolen bases. His projectional volatility is very small. Because he steals, he's pretty safe categorically so that you don't have to find a very different kind of player on the waiver wire should he get hurt. The third base eligibility, he also has second base eligibility, so he'll help your team in case some guy gets injured, or you can just plug him in a second base slot, middle infield slot, third base slot, corner slot, so he can go anywhere. I'm not in love with the guy, but the value says that in the 12th round, he might be a little bit of a marginal value, and again, third base is not deep, so you might want to consider him. Ruvain, why don't you go first here?
Well, he plays in Colorado, so what is there not to like? But seriously, though, he has dropped his K rate last year, and he hit 24 home runs last year, but his home run to fly ball rate dropped to 16%. So there may be some hidden power there, and if he's at Coors, he's gonna hit more home runs possibly than other places. And there's no one behind him really. The farm system there is pretty barren. It's not that good right now. So he's gonna get his playing time. And because, like you said, third base is so shallow, getting him here, he has a possible upside. He can hit 30 home runs. If gets his home run to fly ball rate back to where his career was, he can do that. It's not out of the realm of possibility.
Dan?
Hey, I like having a guy with third base, second base eligibility in the rounds that he is going to be drafted at. Because that's kind of the round where you're kind of looking for upside value. Sometimes someone stole someone from you right before, and it's nice to have that kind of safety, because the magic of Coors is that he doesn't have to have a great system to look good. He had pretty solid counting numbers last year, and it wasn't like he had an amazing year from an overall standpoint. He had an OPS plus right around 100. It wasn't like he had some crazy year he can't maintain. He can maintain 100. I had him on my breakout piece entering the season because it's always hard to tell with a guy like that how, let's just say, the team's poor development of him affected his career trajectory. And there's something we might not necessarily know, but it's something to have in the back of your head.
So the other thing I want to point out also is that the NL West has marginally gotten better for hitters in the sense that there are some ace pitchers that have left. You got Scherzer, who's now in the NL East. You have Gausman, who's now out of here. Kershaw, maybe he'll sign back with the Dodgers, for now in limbo. Maybe Kenley Jansen's out of here. There's some less pitching. I think that, not that it matters all that much, but maybe if there's a tie break, hey, the NL West is better for hitters, and he does play in Colorado. So that could be a deciding factor. The next batch of players, we're going to do all in one shot. Bobby Dahlbach, Nate Lowe, Frank Schwendel, and Miguel Sano. And the reason I'm saying these four players in a row are because of what we refer to on the show as a fantasy hotspot. That's where you have a couple of similar valued by the market, where the market is going for the same price, similar valued players who play either the same position or who have the same similar type of statistical makeup. Here, these are all four first basemen. They're all going roughly in the same round. They're all a bargain. Everyone's a bargain, meaning if you buy Dahlbach, if you buy Schwendel, according to the ATC projections, you're going to make a couple of bucks. So the reason why identifying these hotspots work is because let's say somebody loves Frank Schwendel. They might want to go to rounds too earlier to pick him, $4 extra on him. You can't do anything about that. But because there are 4 of them, and if the average draft price is what we say it is, you're going to have people going at that price or even lower even. You can have even a bigger bargain. So identifying the 4 people let you basically realize the bargain, as opposed to if it's one player, hey, it could be that somebody else wanted him in your league. So of the 4, maybe you don't have to talk about all of them, but is there anybody you want to highlight, Dan, between Dahlbach, Lowe, Schwindel, and Miguel Sano?
Well, from a good standpoint, I do like Nate Lowe quite a bit. He also probably has the most stable job of any of them, except with the possible exception of Sano. I don't think there's a scenario where he loses his job in June. I do think he has more batting average upside than the rest of that group. Zips likes him just fine. I mean, nothing exciting or super amazing. But he's also, he's not particularly old. He's in his mid-20s still, so there's more upside left than Sano or Schwendel. I like Lowe there, and I do like Sano to a degree just because he always has that power potential. But what worries me about Sano is that the injury history, and that I always suspect that there's someone in any league that's going to like his power potential more than I will. I wouldn't want to chase that. He's someone who I would get if he's really cheap, but he's not someone I would chase with any kind of vigor. Now Frank Schwendel is someone I am worried about. He had a great part season in 2021. I gave him a 3rd place vote in the Rookie of the Year race, so I'm definitely on record of not being a Schwendel hater. I believe me and Grant Brisbee were the only 2 to give him any 3rd place votes, but I'm not positive about that. But you look at his history, and his history is not great. I'm not even talking about his lack of major league performance. His minor league performance is pretty just very, very middling and sometimes worse. And he's not a young player. He's going to be 30, which he's not a breakout candidate in that way. So Schwendel is, of the 4, the one I'd most run away from.
Okay, Uwe?
Wow. Okay. I guess I'm going to disagree just a little bit there. Then, Frank Schwendel, I think, is the guy who has possibly the most upside, even though he is turning 30. Last year, in only 64 games, 14 homers, 43 RBIs, with a 326 batting average, and that was without majority without Rizzo or Javier Baez in that lineup, which actually shows something. And in the minors, he has shown that he's had power in the past. From 2016 to 2019 in Double A and Triple A for Detroit and Kansas City, he averaged anywhere between 16 and 24 home runs per year. Last year, if you include his minors, he hit 31 home runs with an average over 310 and a K rate of only 16%. He was a little bit lucky. He had a career high in his BABIP. He had a 348, but still, this could be a very cheap source for power. The guy who I'm nervous about a little bit is Bobby Dahlbach, because he was sent down for a point either last year or the year before. He only had 453 plate appearances and did have 25 home runs, but that batting average kills him. And the Red Sox have a top prospect, Tristan Casas, who actually me and Ariel saw in the Arizona Fall League as the up-and-coming prospect at first base who has a lot of power. So he has pressure on him. So if Dahlbach doesn't produce, he may lose his job pretty quick.
Yeah, there's not a lot of investment the Red Sox have in Dahlbach. If he struggles, and he could, I mean, he did hit, his power came around, but he was also, very one note. You're talking about a sub 300 on base percentage guy. They will move on from him very easily, and when counting stats are so important, you really want to watch out for those guys.
Yeah. I mean, look, each of these guys that we mentioned are going in the 16th round of drafts. Sano actually going slightly later. All these guys are going to have warts. They're not first-round players. They're not seventh-round players. They're not even 12th-round players. Schwendel, what I like about Schwendel is he does have a great contact rate. Up and down the minors, we're talking about, upper 80s contact rate. He had only just a 16% strikeout rate last year, batted 363 .326. Now, I was a little bit lucky, of course, but I do think he has a good floor for batting average because of that. But, hey, he is older. We haven't seen this kind of amazing production in the past. It took him forever to get here from the minors, so you never know. But they have been batting him first. So they do believe in his bat. So that is a win for him. Miguel Sano, to me, Miguel Sano is the most stable person of the lot here. The problem is for fantasy, he might actually bat less than 200. And I don't know if your roster can take a guy who bats under 200 at the first base position. You probably don't. He's very comparable to Joey Gallo. Joey Gallo's better, though. So I would advise against Sano unless you somehow have built up a nice bank of batting average and he drops even later than round 18. Dahlbach, I think you guys expressed it well, and I do agree with Nate Lowe as the best of the bunch here. Nate Lowe has a very, very small interprojectional standard deviation and one of the lowest of starting players intraprojectional standard deviation because he does steal a bunch. He had 8 stolen bases last year. Doesn't hit for tremendous power. That's because he hits a lot of ground balls, but he's good for close to 20, maybe high teens. He should bat right in the middle of the thick of things, and as Dan said, he's guaranteed a job, really. He's on a Texas team who just got in Semien and just got in, what's his name? Slips my mind. Seager, yes, thank you.
What a nice middle infield that is.
Pretty good. I think of Correa in my head. I'm like, wait a minute, he didn't sign yet. No, Seager. So, he's got some bats to protect him and to knock in. So I think his run production will only go up from here. So I think Nate Lowe of the bunch. But again, it's really about the price. If people are pushing up Nate Lowe 2 more rounds and they're dropping Schwendel around, I think that Swindell would be the right place. And that's why you have this hot spot, because it's a value proposition. You'll get somebody at this price, they're bargains, you grab any one of them. Any final thoughts on those 4?
Yeah, I'm actually a little bit concerned about Nate Lowe because he can lose playing time. The Rangers' top prospect is Josh Young, and he is a third baseman, and he has nowhere else to play besides third base. So if Nate Lowe doesn't produce like he has the last couple of years, he also can lose a job because it looks like Texas is in a win-now scenario, and if just like Bobby Dahlbach, if he doesn't produce, he can be replaced pretty quickly.
Yeah. I guess that's true about anybody also. They do also have Kiner Falefa, who I'm guessing is going to be the third baseman, right?
I expect them to use him fairly flexibly. I think he'll play third base until Young takes over, and then he'll probably be super subby around it. One reason I'm comfortable about Lowe is even if he loses the first base job, you look at Rangers DH. I mean, Willie Calhoun, I have zero faith in at this point. I like Andy Ibanez as a spare part, but I don't think the Rangers are as likely to be in contention as they think right now. And when push comes to shove, who are you going to give the at-bats to, Lowe or Ibanez at DH, especially because Ibanez is useful at other positions. So I am more confident, I think, about his playing time. But who knows? Maybe he'll lose his playing time by May. I've seen weirder things happen.
Right. Well, one of the biggest bargains we have, once again, and every year he shows up in this category, Eric Hosmer. Eric Hosmer is a guy who gets a lot of playing time in general, or he has in the past. He's had typically over 600 at-bats. Don't know if he's going to have that this year. He is getting to that point maybe in his career, but his batting average has been solid all throughout his career. Does anybody want to guess what his career batting average is, Eric Hosmer?
I actually looked it up, so I know it. So I'll let Dan guess.
Yeah, I actually opened it when you mentioned Hosmer, so I saw it too.
277.
277. That's pretty darn good.
But he's also only hit that once in the last 4 years. It's very
true.
It's very
That's
Kansas
true.
City based. His Willie Mays Hayes offensive profile hasn't played as well in San Diego.
Yeah, that's true. His contact rate is pretty good, though, still. So I see him as a more variable type player in batting average, but the upside for hitting 300 to me is still there. He had a little bit of a launch angle revolution back in 2020. Didn't really sustain this year. So how many homers is he going to have? I think you can count on a dozen, maybe 18 or so, not more than that. The big value in the past has been his run production. He consistently had 70s, 80s, 90s runs and RBIs. Will that continue? Will they platoon him? Not sure. So I'm not sure I believe the ATC projection here for him. He's probably a slight bargain. He's probably a $2 bargain, but I don't need a $2 bargain in the 23rd round. I want somebody more with upside. So I'm probably not going to be on Hosmer this year, although he is projected for a bargain. So, he's going to be somebody that you'll see what his usage is early on. You'll see if he gels, and could be a good year, but I'll bet on the under on projections.
Yeah, I'm not very optimistic. You could see that the team is finally beginning to sour on him as the season went on, because he started the year mostly hitting cleanup, and as the year went on, he was back 5th and then 6th, and by the end of the year, there was a lot of Cronenworth in there.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure from what I've heard that the Padres have been trying to give him away as best the Padres, I think I said Pirates, but they were unsuccessful giving him away at least up until lockout time. They might succeed when the offseason resumes. But I think that his contract is close enough getting towards the end that they're less worried about benching him, where they kind of had that feeling like, are we going to bench a guy in year 2 of a possibly 8-year contract? I think his playing time is very risky.
Question to you, though, Dan, is did Dave Cameron have anything to do with his signing?
Well, if Dave had influence on the signing, that probably would have been in a no direction. Dave was hired after the signing, which is funny because it's weird to take a new job when you've publicly been bashing your new employer right at that time. But that's how the game is played. Front offices tend to be less sensitive about that kind of thing.
Anything bad to say about the Mets, Ruve?
No. I actually have a bold prediction with Eric Hosmer. I think he gets traded to the Yankees mid-season. The reason why, it's a perfect fit. The Yankees need a defensive first baseman to play toward the end of the game if they're going to keep Luke Voigt and not sign Anthony Rizzo. Hosmer is due $20 million this year. The next 3 years, it's only $13 million per year. That's cheap. If they combine both Hosmer and Voigt at first base, that they don't need to sign Anthony Rizzo, and they can re-sign Aaron Judge. So my hot take is that I think he's going to get traded to the Yankees. It's been rumored for a long time that he'd come to the Yankees, and that left field porch for a left-handed hitter like him, that will play well.
Then his projection will go up, right?
It should, but again, this is all speculation. He did, Dan. You mentioned that the Padres soured on him last year, so it's sort of trending in that way. And he doesn't have a complete no trade clause, so it's very possible he can get traded.
I think he ends up back in the Royals. I think my hot prediction is that the Padres offer the Royals a prospect or two to take Hosmer and Myers from them. You can kind of see the Royals seeing the short-term benefit of adding both of them. Hosmer, I don't have any optimism on. Unless a team has a 6-inch outfield wall, I don't think any environment's going to make him a power hitter until he kind of goes back to hitting fly balls instead of everything into the ground hard. But my pick would be that they end up in the Royals, the Hosmer-Myers reunion in Kansas City.
We got 2 people who are predicting a trade. So there you go. You heard it here first on
a quote trade. It's more of a giveaway.
Quote trade giveaway, but that's what we're projecting on the Beat the Shift podcast here, presented by Fangraphs. We'll do one more player here, Jose Miranda. And, ATC, most projection systems don't really put rookies as really, really good. Right? We talked about Marcel the Monkey system. I mean, they always project league average play from rookies. Most projection systems are punitive, and ATC actually is especially punitive on rookies. It averages other projections, and you get that effect of it just crippling some of the value. So if I see a rookie that is projected decently, I say, we got to take a look. That's Jose Miranda, who's projected to be a bench player in 15-team leagues. He's going very, very late. We're talking at the last pick of your draft here. I'm projecting a 272 batting average, 13 homers in 363 at-bats. It's quite a lot of playing time. His contact rate is enormous, so I think he could hit the ground running with the hitting there. Question is, where would he play? Donaldson is the third baseman. Is he going to move to DH? Maybe. Would he come up as the DH? I don't know. Who is the DH for the Twins? Is it going to be Kirilloff? Who else is it going to be? Is it Sano and somebody else will play first? I don't know. I think there's a shot. I think that if you have a deep bench and you can afford to see whether he comes up or not, or maybe he'll come up right from the start. I don't know. He's an interesting, intriguing player. I like his rates going forward here, and I think that he could hit the ground running if he's up. Any thoughts on him, Dan?
Well, Zips is optimistic on it. Obviously,
good.
Zips is projecting a fuller slate of at-bats, but Zips actually has him like right around Justin Turner in all the categories.
Wow.
Has him with a better batting average, one less home run, 7 more runs, 1 more RBI, about the same, just a couple stolen bases. The question, of course, is where does he get the job? And I think it is very possible that Kirilloff plays left. I'm not really excited about Larnack out there. I don't think Larnack or Rooker is the solution in left. I think it'd be too limiting. I mean, there's always health, but it'd be kind of limiting to just take Kirilloff, who's one of their more interesting young outfielders, and just sticking him at DH. I think they're going to want to protect Donaldson's health, and when that happens, who's the likely beneficiary? And I think that's Miranda. I think there's even a chance that Donaldson even gets traded during the season, because I don't think the Twins' pitching is going to really make them competitive. They're in a much worse position than they were entering last season. So I would definitely take a speculative swing at Miranda, especially because in the majors he's probably going to play some second as well, which also adds into the value.
Yeah, Ruben?
Yeah, and with the Twins being just the picture of health, with Byron Buxton in the outfield there, with Josh Donaldson, who never gets hurt, with Kirilloff, who's actually coming off of an injury. Miguel Sano always has these freak injuries. Max Kepler is not necessarily the standard of consistency out there. Jose Miranda will find playing time one way or another. You can almost count on it. And in the minors last year, he actually played first, second, and third. So he was actually, the Twins are getting him ready to be one of those guys who can move all over the place, because he is considered a subpar fielder, which means that they don't care really where he goes. They just want to get his bat in the lineup. They're trying to find the right spot for him. Plus, last year in the minors, in AA and AAA, he hit 30 home runs. He batted .344, a strikeout rate, which is this is a little bit crazy, a strikeout rate of 12.5 and a walk rate of 7.1. There's no way that he can do that in the majors. It's almost impossible. That's crazy. But they will find a place for him because he has a bat. They just need to find where he's going to play and not hurt them in the field.
I mean, the only guy who does better than that is like Nick Madrigal, who had something like a crazy 94% contact rate or some ridiculous number like that. But that's very atypical. Although the Twins do have another great batting average guy in Luis Arias. I mean, he's a really pure hitter. But
if you have Jose Miranda move into second base, you have the pure hitter with the power, which may unseat Luis Arias.
I believe that Zips had him as the projected batting average leader, Arias, in both 20 and 21. Although it has Soto edging him out in 2022. Arias is so much fun. I mean, from a fantasy standpoint, he's possibly not quite as exciting. But from just a straight up baseball standpoint, he's such kind of an old school type of player. The high batting average, second baseman with no power, that hits left-handed. That he's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Top 5 ATC projected batting averages: Soto, Guerrero, Trey Turner, Luis Arias, Nick Madrigal. My top 5. Anybody want to guess the 6th?
Brantley?
Nope, he's 12th.
Tatis? Oh, sorry.
Tatis, no.
Oh gosh, yes. Wait. Oh, I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna look him up real quick.
Think of the letter F.
It's Yuli Gurriel?
No. Think of the letter F squared.
Freeman.
Freddie Freeman.
All
right. Anyways, we got a couple mailbag questions. Jason asks, how are projections weighting pitching data before sticky stuff ban and from after? Is September, when spin rates seem to climb back up for some guys, a more valuable data set than April, or even July right after the ban went into effect? I think your answer is it's probably not, and Zip's going to take into account, or maybe you can answer otherwise.
Oh, your answer was correct. I looked at the spin rate issue. I looked at different types of players. I tried to use any kind of exploratory data analysis to try to get the kinds of pictures who were benefiting and not benefiting. And the data was a mess because, of course, you're going to be plagued by small samples as often as you can do. But the players who had declined spin rate weren't necessarily who you thought. The results weren't who you thought. I think it's a complete unknown, especially because we don't know what the ball's going to be like. We don't quite know how strict enforcement is. We don't know about stuff about the pre-tacked balls and stuff. It's a complete unknown, and I don't like those stabs in the dark, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah. And, for those who think that Garrett Cole, sticky stuff guy, if you want to bid lower on him, that's fine. I'll scoop him up in our league. I think Cole's the number one pitcher. Breathing Orange Fire asks, what effect does the canceled 2022 minor league season have on projections for young players and prospects? How much does it increase the margin of error on these projections? It certainly does increase it for sure. And for me, it's also not just about the uncertainty, but it's also about the fact that these guys had less development. What do you think, Dan?
I think from a fundamental level that projections for minor leaguers, we did have a full season in 2021 pretty much, but it's something you can't really account for because people will say, so Dan, how are you compensating for the lack of a 2020 season for minor league players? And my answer is terribly, because you can't compensate for everything. Sometimes you're just going to have to accept that your data is worse, your projections are going to be worse. And I think it's been tough on teams because there are a lot of upper minors guys that teams want to look at. I think the Orioles and all their kind of fringy quadruple A pictures that they have, that really hurt them because it was just one less season of development. We have less information. And I think it's still going to take another year or two to kind of iron out and kind of everyone graduate from that season kind of aging off the horizon before you kind of are as confident as you normally would be.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Last question we'll do. Alexander asks, what made Dan decide to go the Boogie Nights font for Soto in the Washington National Graphic? He's referring to the fact that you blew up him to a 1,000-point font. After seeing ATC's projection, does he think that 7.8 WAR was too conservative? ATC, by the way, projects 7.4 WAR for Soto. So what made you blow up him? Was that just fun?
It was fun because the Nats projections were, except for the top, were a little depressing, and he's the projection that you want to see. So I like to play with the fonts and stuff in graphics. So you look at that outfield, you don't have to look at that. Just pretend it's Juan Soto's show. That's what you want to see. You want to see Soto because he was the only outfielder that in the depth chart projections that Zibs had them above 2 wins. You had each of the kind of messes in center field and left at like 1.2, 1.3. Zips didn't like shortstop or second base or third base. So Soto 7.8. He got the Ted Williams top comp. I don't think I've had that before. I talked with Jason Stark about that for a piece last year. But, yeah, it's not necessarily peak Ted Williams. It's early Ted Williams, who was still a fantastic player. But you can look at young Ted Williams and Juan Soto. And Juan Soto, you don't laugh about it. If you can be compared to Ted Williams and people don't think you're insane, that's a damn good player. And nothing he does at this point would surprise me because you look at Votto's plate discipline. Juan Soto's is better than Votto's, which is just frightening.
Yeah, we had on Trevor May of the Mets on our show here, and we asked him point blank, who you scared to face? It was like Soto.
Yeah, what do you do with the guy? It's
no holes.
I mean, he should call whether something's a ball or a strike. Trevor May's probably the only major league player I've talked with about video games, but never baseball.
No,
Wow.
That's interesting. Yeah, good guy. We had a nice show with him. You also mentioned Rafael Devers as the second guy. And ATC likes Rafael Devers again this year. So you never know. These pitchers do know who's good to face. I'll tell you that. Do you think that Soto's the best player in baseball now, eclipsing Mike Trout?
I don't think he's the best player in baseball overall, simply because he's not a shortstop. But I think as a pure hitter, he's the best in baseball.
Okay. One other question I had personally about Zips is position-wise. How does Zips take into account position? Are you projecting a player by a position? I know you're not exactly allocating playing time by position to teams, or maybe you are. How do you deal with the positions in your model?
Well, when it's time to do the season projections, I do have a model, and I do have to decide who plays where, and I do have a probability model so that in some season simulations, guys play a full season. Sometimes they miss the season from an injury, especially pitchers. For the projections themselves, I use the most recent played weighted recent playing time from a position standpoint. Zips just goes with that one. And if I know for a fact that the player is absolutely going to play a different position, I will project them as a certain position, simply because it's an equivalent. I can change that in Zips in like a minute if it's wrong. It's one of the few places that there's any kind of Szymborski, I wouldn't say thumb on the scale, but at least I'm paying attention to what I put in the scale in that case. It's not as important as some people might think, but it is useful.
All right, it's time for the Injury Guru's injury update. Ruvain, what do you got from Instagram this week?
Okay, so again, due to the lockout, I'm still relegated to scouring Twitter and Instagram for videos or updates from the players themselves, as teams are not giving any injury updates whatsoever. The players are also rehabbing on their own, which you have to remember, without being overseen by the team doctors or staff due to the lockout. So take that into consideration when players are coming back as well. Another video surfaced for Acuna, and he had the ACL repair. Everyone knows that already, for his right knee. He was shown doing agility drills, which is great, but I still want to see him running. He looks good, and right now I believe his ADP is around 13. As soon as we see him on the field, and if there is any sort of a lockout, his value is going to jump even higher than that. Alex Bregman, who had right wrist surgery in November, showed a video of himself hitting with no pain whatsoever, including a bat flip at the end that I'm not sure why, but you're just showing that he's healthy, so that's a positive thing. So if you have any question about that, there should be no more questions. Carlos Carrasco showed a video of himself throwing. He was pitching. He was light tossing. Nothing major, but he seemed to be throwing very easy and pain-free. Last October, he had surgery to remove a bone fragment from his right elbow, but it looks like he's progressing pretty well. And another one that actually just came over today, Kenta Maeda, who had Tommy John surgery September 1st of last year, told the Tokyo Press that he's targeting a September 2022 return. This is his quote: "Even if I can return, it will be around September. It's not a 0% chance. However, fantasy-wise, he has very little value because even if he does come back in September, it's only going to be as a relief pitcher."
All right. Well, this was a really fun and informative show. As you guys can see, Dan really knows his stuff here. Dan Szymborski, he's on Twitter at @Szymborski. That's Szymborski with an SZY to start on Twitter. And, of course, he writes and does the Zips projections over at Fangraphs. Am I missing anything that you want to plug, Dan?
No, that's pretty much what I do. I am terrible, so you might not want to follow me on Twitter. But Google will figure it out if you need to figure out all those letters. There are a lot of them, and they don't always come in a logical order.
There you go. Well, we'll definitely tag your information to our podcast, so just go over to the Rotographs post here and link on right there. Of course, you just go to the front page of Fangraphs, and you'll see Dan all over there right away. Ruvain, why don't you plug your stuff?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come, and they're not really coming that much right now, but hopefully the lockout will be over and that'll end, and we'll get all the updates in a whole flood, and I'll get them out to you as much as I can. Also, I have a weekly in-season article with Rotoballer that discusses everything I mentioned on Twitter, as well as other players as well.
All right, and I'm Ariel Cohen, and you can find my work over at Fangraphs in the Rotograph section, at CBS Sportsline, and at Rotoballer. The ATC projections are up, and all 3 sites right now. You can take a look. Dan Zip's projections might actually hit in full. Right now you can download his articles one by one and take a look at the projections, but it'll all be in the same format as ATC, probably when this podcast hits or a day after, so be sure to look out that, and I think that will complete all of the Fangraphs projections once that hits. You can follow me on Twitter at ATCNY, the shortest Twitter handle in all of fantasy baseball, and you can listen to me right here on the Beat the Shift podcast, presented by Fangraphs, each and every week. All right, we're going to have some middle infield talk next week. Thank you so much, Dan, for coming on the show, talk about projections and corner infielders. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.